Morning, Granny Gear here on a cold and blustery day in Southern California. Today I'm going to be talking about the conundrum of all-road bike versus gravel bike and which one is right for you. Because there are differences. I'm going to try and narrow that down, hopefully help you make a decision. I'll be doing that using a coffee cup and a couple rulers. Here we go. Now, if you've been following my channel at all, you'll notice that recently I've been spending a lot of time on a couple Turner bikes, titanium drop bar bikes, and I've had a Turner Cyclosis gravel bike and a Turner RT all-road bike. And it's given me an opportunity to think a little bit about if I could just have one, what would it be? What would be the real differences I would need to consider to get the right bike for the right rider? Now, you would think this is a fairly easy thing to discuss, but it honestly isn't. It's really rather complicated. Now, I'm going to use the two bikes behind me as an example. That makes it easier. But you know, within the world of what a gravel bike is and what an all-road or endurance bike is a huge variation. There are all-road bikes that look very much like a fast carbon road bike, but they take a huge tire. There are gravel bikes that look very much like a gravel bike. On the other hand, they take a fairly small tire. And so there is obviously a lot of variance in the marketplace. But I'm going to be using the Turner Cyclosis here on my left and the Turner RT here behind me on the right as my two examples of the genre, if you will. Let's get started. Enter the ruler. Now, I spared no expense at the local drugstore for these two rulers in bright colors because I wanted to use them to make a point. And I think it's the most determining factor in this whole thing, at least as far as the bike is concerned, but also how the rider needs to take into consideration the right decision. And that is, how big are your tires? Or in other words, how big a tire do you need to make you happy riding your bike in the situations you'll find yourself in? Because here's the thing, nothing, in my opinion, so determines the limitations of a bike, what it can do, where it can go, and how happy you'll be in that situation than the tire. Because we're talking about dirt here, aren't we? And dirt can vary between hard packed, smooth, and fast, where by golly, you can ride a road bike on it, to very, very challenging sandy washes and rough roads, dirt roads like I have here in Southern California. So what we need to consider is, if we're looking for a one-bike solution, well, there are things we have to take into consideration besides the tires. There's geometry and there's gearing. But both of those are less critical than the tire, and here's why I say that. Geometry within all road to gravel does vary, but not terribly widely. And so while a slacker gravel bike geometry will certainly make you feel more confident when things are steep and rough, if that's your normal, well then you probably already know that you just need a gravel bike, and that's an easy decision. So geometry is important, but not necessarily all that critical. Now, as far as gearing, pretty much you can duplicate any gearing on an all-road bike that you can duplicate on a gravel bike. Now, if you're at the extreme end of things, if you are running very, very difficult dirt roads like I am, well, that gets to where you need a certain type of gearing that may not be very good for the road. But in general terms, not only can you select the gearing that works best for you, you can change it later. So if your all-road bike, like for instance the RT behind me, it's running a 2x combination of a SRAM crank with a 46-33 chainring and a 10-33 cassette. For a lot of people, that's all the gravel bike gearing they will ever need. And if I ever wanted to go deeper with 1x, well, I can put that on the RT. I can even go to a smaller crank. I can put a bigger cassette. So through the life of the bike, if I find I need to get that perfect gearing for me, if there is such a thing, I can change that. But here's the thing. What I can't do with the RT is put the size tire on it that I can put on the Cyclosis. No, the Cyclosis easily accepts a 45 millimeter tire. That's what I have on there now. I think there's room for a 50. Well, the Artie, I could probably squeeze a 40 in there, but it's claimed to be run, it's suggested you run a 38, but let's just say I can put a 40 in there. Well, but that's it, isn't it? I can't go bigger. So if my riding experience is much, much better with the bigger tire, well, I am going to be out of luck with an Artie or any other endurance or all-road bike like it, because you can't put a bigger tire in there if it doesn't fit. You can change the gearing, you can adjust to the geometry within reason, but you can't put a bigger tire in a smaller space. Now, the biggest variable in this really is not the bike, it is the rider. What is it that you expect? What is it that you require out of your bike experience? What are your typical rides like? Who are you? Are you a very, very strong, very fit rider who can, and technically skilled to where maybe you could take an Artie with a smaller tire into difficult situations, and for you it would just be fun and challenging, where for some other rider it would be a nightmare? And if so, you can deal with a wider variation of what is acceptable for you for your riding. Are you a rider that generally rides the road and your pace may not be terribly high, you're not racing, and yet occasionally you see that little divergent path in the woods that makes you go, I'd like to explore that, but my road bike seems slightly inadequate. Now for you, the Artie is possibly a perfect bike, and maybe a gravel bike is a little bit overkill. Maybe. So let's get back to the ruler for a second. Let's say this ruler I'm holding in my hand at the moment represents 2 bikes on one particular ride. Now you notice, well, Granny Gear, I only see 1 bike. Well, there's actually 2. And the reason you couldn't see both of them is because one is pretty much overlapping the other. And I make that point to say that there will be ride situations where either a gravel bike or an all-road bike will be basically the same experience for you. It really doesn't matter which one you have. Maybe you just run to the store for an ice cream. Maybe you're just commuting. Maybe you're just out on casual rides on very lightly mixed terrain. But what is going to happen as the rides become more and more challenging, maybe the dirt gets dirtier or the road bike experience becomes more roadier, you will find that you have less and less overlap area before one bike or the other begins to make more sense. And if you follow that out to its logical conclusion, eventually they will not overlap at all, and you will get to where you find yourself with a dedicated road bike and a dedicated gravel bike. And that is where this Granny Gear is, because I have found that for me, the all-road solution is not a good solution. My dirt is too steep, it's too rough, it's too long, it's too difficult, to where I need a dedicated gravel bike gearing that doesn't make sense for the road. I need a geometry that makes more sense for the more technical situations, where on all-road endurance geometry would be a little sketchy. And I want a bigger tire, and all of those things mean this Turner Cyclosis sitting here behind me is my ideal gravel bike. And in fact, it's so ideal that I own it, because I liked it so much, I bought this from David Turner, but I digress. So my road bike is what I require for true road rides where the pace is higher, the climbs are longer, the road is smoother, and I would be dragging along a gravel bike. Now for me, an all-road bike could be the one bike solution, but I'd be compromising in a lot of areas. And it just doesn't make sense for me. And so that's where it gets to be largely determined on you. What do you want? What do you expect from your bike riding experience? And only you know that. I don't. So let's wrap this up, shall we? If I had to narrow it down to one of the most important factors that would determine which bike I need to ride and which one would make me happy, it would be how big a tire can you fit in it. Well, that's the way I think about it anyway. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you're on the horns of the dilemma of which bike is right for you, all-road or gravel, and if you're wondering, What the coffee cup was for? Well, I like coffee. You guys have a great week or weekend. And as always, go ride your bikes. I wonder, does this tire make my gravel bike look fat?